And I believe Daniel is joining soon. So Eric is here from Coinbase. What a good timing, Eric, uh, in terms of the announcements that just came out of Coinbase to support agentic transactions. And hopefully we'll have Daniel join as well to share his thoughts from BitGPT and X504 and so on. So Eric, I'll hand it over to you. Just give us some of your thoughts, share your background, and tell us about some latest developments that Coinbase is sharing with the world. Very exciting times.
Yeah, totally. It's good to meet you, Ramesh. So I'm the head of engineering for Coinbase Developer Platform. So Coinbase Developer Platform helps developers build on chain and build in the Web3 space. And before earlier in my career, I actually did I started my career in machine learning, and my career has kind of been hedged between machine learning and crypto Web3. The my I was doing to folks earlier in the talks in the sessions point on I was doing this in this year, like my LLM street cred is that I was training and running custom transformers and running them in production in 2019 for a couple of non-text tasks. But transformers actually generalize very well to arbitrary sequences of events. So back in a previous tour of duty, I was the engineering manager and tech lead for Coinbase's machine learning platform, and so we were doing a lot of like train transformers on event sequences from our consumer products, and then use those as like foundational models into a bunch of different tasks for fraud and limits and a bunch of other things. Worked incredibly well. But we were very, very early users of like Hugging Face's Transformers library back when it was called PyTorch BERT. And have done a lot of thinking about machine learning, have done a lot of thinking about crypto. And I completely agree with Guillermo and the kind of thesis of NANDA of these agents should be decentralized. And I think my top level premise and thesis for the work that we've been doing with X402 which is a payments protocol over HTTP that Coinbase released, is that one, the decentralization is actually done. The internet is decentralized already, right? There's like all these things around discovery and curation and everything else that is things to figure out, and like there's a lot of standards that need to be formed around like communication schemas, and that's where things like A to A and MCP come in. But the largest friction point I see is like, what is the incentive structure for decentralized agents to interact with each other? And so I think that incentive point is just straight up money. And so X402 is a way of allowing for very small payments very quickly in real time on top of HTTP. And so it works for any HTTP service. It sits in the headers and functions as signatures in the requests already being made between your client and server. And so it layers into things like MCP. I've looked less deeply into A to A, so I'm not sure the integration story there quite as well. But if you can handle HTTP, you can probably handle a lot of the decentralized protocols that you may want to build up. And so X402 allows these like micro payments, and I think the thing that it does that is like counterintuitive to folks who are used to more of like a credit card system is that like with stable coins and on-chain transactions, like you truly have programmable money, and so you can do more complex things like deferred payment, where you you have a guarantee of up to an amount, but you actually determine the amount to pay after the tokens have been generated, and so you can like price them correctly, and you can pay like 1/100 of a cent, and there's like no fees involved. And so you can have an agent, ask another agent to perform some task, and that agent can be like, hey, I'm willing to pay you 10 cents to perform this task on my behalf. And there's no need for like an API key or any other kind of like source of value transfer that gets traced back. It's these blockchains largely are like I think the bleeding edge of decentralized technology in terms of like reputation and monetary aspects. And so I think my prompt to the AI community is there's a lot of technology out there that we should think about involving into this as we think about how we decentralize these agents. And there's lessons to be learned and infrastructure to be leveraged.
Let's dial the time back a little bit, right? I mean, as we talk about X402, the HTTP 402 was reserved for a future use, like long time ago, right? RFC 7231. And why is now the time for agents to rely on it? Is this what I mean? HTTP 402 wasn't really thought for agent, but clearly X402 or H402, are becoming more suitable for this. So just tell the audience a little bit of a background. A lot of people here are not classic Web3 folks; they're coming from the AI point of view. So maybe walk us through that thought process.
For sure, great prompt. So the 402 as a status code has been in the HTTP spec for a long time, decades now. In fact, Mark Andreessen called not figuring out how to put payments into the browser during his Netscape days as like the original sin of the internet.
Right.
And we've kind of had to build up all of these complementary systems and bring credit cards and things that people forget. Credit cards started out as a you slide a thing over a piece of copy paper and you create like an imprint of the credit card. And we've taken these like traditional systems that were how we moved money before the internet, and we've kind of made them work on the internet as well to the best of our ability. But there hasn't been a ton of modernization of financial rails, right? So the T+2, for anyone who isn't at finance, is like very common a very common phrase in the finance world, where T+2 is T+2 days. And so that's the amount of time it actually takes for money to settle between financial institutions, because many of these things are actually at some point a layer of abstraction over someone receiving a fax in the office of one bank or sending a fax from one bank to the other. Maybe that fax is slightly automated, but it's a very manual system. And so I think the reason as to why it's now an interesting time to activate the 402 status code is, one, the technology has gotten good enough where T+2 in kind of the Web3 world these days actually means T+2 seconds at the limit, and soon will be T+200 milliseconds, where funds are actually in your account, finalized, and you can go and spend them without like having to wait for your bank to do some like background math to land the funds, and they're having to be like lines of credit and this lazily evaluated kind of funding that occurs in traditional finance.
Yeah.
And then two, it's I think agents introduce like a real big why now as to a new use case that clearly stretches the limits of programmable money. And humans are kind of okay with entering a credit card in a browser, and a human in the loop is pretty confident they want to make that transaction. And if you go to like do the same, if you purchase from the same store a lot, they'll save your credit card and give you kind of a better UX. But these agents like need to you probably don't want to trust them with your credit card right now. I don't think anyone is like super confident with any of the foundational models where they're okay with saying like, yes, you have unlimited ability to use my $10,000 limit Chase credit card. And they are also like much more programmable. And I think the other thing is credit fees in traditional finance are typically about 3%, and that kind of kills any kind of microtransaction. One of the reasons why you don't have microtransactions on the internet is just 30 cents plus 3% is the fees on a credit card, and so inherently you can't do anything less than 3 cents because you'll just be losing money. So bit of a ramble. Hopefully that was at least some good context.
Fantastic. So if so does it mean, and again, as I said, a lot of the audience here is not a classic Web3 audience, they're coming from AI. So the notion that you have to use USDC for X402 as opposed to something else, like people are comfortable with Apple Pay or Google Pay, or pick your favorite choices. When are we going to get into a world where I can be a consumer using my agents, and I feel pretty comfortable? I don't want to get into stable coins and crypto and so on. It feels like it's something they use, at the grocery store.
I think this is like the place where the layers of abstraction between finance and the consumer experience start to really show themselves.
Right.
And so, I'm not sure if you saw, the Apple had lost a decision to Epic last week, which meant that they had to allow people to link out to other payment methods
Mhm.
in apps. And so I think we're starting to get to the point where you will be able to use Apple Pay, and we're starting to see pressure on large companies to accept other forms of payment versus their
Right.
first party forms of payment.
Mhm.
And so like when you go through the when you pay for something at the store, whether it's Apple Pay or using a credit card that you're physically having in your pocket, what's happening? Well, if you use Apple Pay, you're creating a transaction with Apple. Apple, depending on the credit card, is forwarding that transaction to either the Visa network, the MasterCard network, the Amex network. The Amex network is like settling that between accounts, and then they're debiting your account and sending money to the merchant's account. And that's typically going to happen during like a weekly or a bi-weekly reconciliation where they like take all the money that they on the Amex network that has been paid to, Sue's local bakery, and send it to Sue's local bakery's bank account. And the thing that we don't yet have in crypto that is like making good progress, but is still not ready yet, is these levels of indirection where
Right.
you have abstractions where like stable coins are kind of the alternative to the Visa network in the legacy system, where the blockchain is kind of like the analogy to the Visa network. Huge advantages to something like the Visa network in terms of latency and transparency and ease of integration. There's no permission structures that prevent you from directly integrating into any blockchain that something like USDC lives on top of, versus like good luck trying to get a first party integration directly into the Visa network. Um, and yeah, people are like Stripe, to the comment in the chat, are starting to blur the lines, but it takes more people blurring the lines between these systems and creating these layers of consumer friendly abstractions.
Yeah.
Um, but my challenge too would be that I think that these things are much less complicated than people assume. Like these systems actually are very simple, and anyone who's capable of reasoning through an agent is more than capable of signing a transaction on X402.
So that's fascinating. I know you said a couple of important things there, right? The simplicity is critical, and as much as we want to have like an Apple Pay, Google Pay kind of experience, is the intermediaries that are actually slowing it down. So if you kind of dial the clock forward and think about everybody else, the Stripes of the world, of course, Coinbase, maybe other payment platforms. I mean, the Web3 community has really tied the identity, authentication, wallet as like one atomic concept, right? Which doesn't exist in the AI world. In the AI world, some of these things are outside, the perimeter. And then you transact in data or compute or intelligence. And then other things are kind of taken care of separately. So do you think the need to bind these things very tightly, identity, wallets, authentication, and of course the agentic interactions, is that a good thing or not so good thing?
I think it depends on the problem you're trying to solve. And I think the thing that I'd say is Web3 has largely coupled those things together, not because they have to, but because it was the best user experience that for the moment in time. And so you have now actually systems like uh, the Coinbase team has something called sub accounts, which is basically delegated access, which allows you to have like a singular identity across yourself and like multiple of your applications, and then give control to like certain parts of your identity to other systems.
Right.
And I think like more broadly on my prompt earlier, like you can use the technology that Web3 gives you to do kind of anything. Like you can have different methods of identity and different methods of access and authorization. Uh, it's purely neutral technology, right? And it's just like what is the opinion of what is the right way of structuring things. The only real thing that Web3 prescribes is a way of coming to consensus as to the state of a program. but that program can do anything. And those programs are now actually incredibly cheap to transact on things like on Base, Coinbase's L2 or Solana or other chains. Fees are now like a hundredth of a cent. And so if you're trying to have these decentralized systems of agents that come to consensus, like you can try to build up these structures that have emergent decentralized behavior, but I think eventually you're going to run into the same incentive problems that Web3 has been trying to solve for the last like 15 years at this point, around like how do you get people to maintain the state of that consensus? What is your incentive if you're not just like a benevolent person who's monetizing at a different point of the stack for actually keeping like a decentralized registry of agents?
Yeah.
Uh, and those are the places where because crypto just kind of is like a bedrock foundational piece of infrastructure that is permissionless and anyone can build on it, you kind of get a lot of those answers out of the box for free.
Yeah, that's amazing. So there is, I mean, we're already seeing variants. There is X402, H402, L402 coming up, and which is also happening in the pure agentic space as well, right? Like MCP A2A, we just heard from Cisco and so on. So the whole dream of the Nanda team, which is a multi-university, multi-company, multi-startup organization, is really to see how we can create a quilt, not necessarily create a single protocol, but create a quilt so that they can all be working together. Again, I don't want to use the word interoperability because there's more than interoperability to make these things work. So any role you think a community like an architecture like Nanda can play, as you are doing an amazing innovation with X402, but others are doing other things to make agentic rails for payments possible. What can you tell this audience about what they should be working on and what role Nanda can play?
I think my prompt would be to take a look at the history of trying to build these decentralized systems and try to learn the lessons. Like I think this similar to like with X402, we looked at HTTP and the history of forming HTTP as an inspiration for, okay, how do you do these things? How do you make them truly permissionless and decentralized and open standards? And there's a lot of really good groundwork laid in the web space. Like the internet ultimately is the greatest success story ever of creating decentralized infrastructure. And so I think actually my prompt would be to lean into the web as the decentralized route for a lot of these things. Like the question to really ask is, do you need a unique identifier? For what value does having a dedicated form of identity for agents give you that DNS doesn't give you? Because it's really difficult to build up alt systems that are completely parallel to existing systems that are like widely adopted in the web 2 world, right? And there's probably more that you can leverage there than you may think. For example, like I think MCP is so powerful because it really is a like standardization of access to tools, because you have all this in the HTTP. You have like, okay, there's Open API and there's older generations of Open API like Swagger, and you have people just doing custom APIs that do whatever they think is the right thing to do. But these standards really matter, and the adding standards that are agent friendly is, I think, to the web is like kind of the reorientation of, instead of think standards for agents, it's standards for the web for agents is kind of my inversion.
Yeah. Jay, I know we had some trouble joining from GPT. Just give us a 2-minute summary of how you're thinking about this space.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks a lot, Professor. At BitGPT, I think when we started about a year ago, our sort of vision was that we see a universe or a world where there's swarms of sort of really decentralized agents who work with each other, communicate, and sort of get things done. But the inherent baseline problem that you run into is that there is no real incentive for sort of decentralized systems to work together. And just like Eric mentioned earlier, money is the ultimate incentive, right? If you need to get a system of particles to work together, you need to give them the right set of energy. And that's when we realize that, yes, if agents are going to organize themselves, coordinate, and function, they sort of need money rails to incentivize each other to work. But for us, while we were doing this, we also realized one thing, that it's not always agent to agent communication uh, or agent to agent monetization that's a problem. Uh, for most agents, especially the ones that work independently, there are a few factors such as access to data, access to live information, access to storage, or the ability to store long-term running memory as well, which becomes a challenge. Now, this is where we saw a lot of independent Asian developers struggling. And we realized that in such use cases as well, microtransactions become a massive, massive unlock. So, for example, we were working with somebody who was developing an agent that, tweeted stuff in just like we saw the whole vibe about a month or 2 months ago, where it tweeted stuff, but it read a lot from the Morales API. So they had to put their credit card in onto the Morales API and then sort of fetch information from that, which really defeats the purpose of being truly anonymous and not giving up your identity. And then we realized that what if they could pay Morales for every API request that they sent, and Morales just accepts the payment and then releases this information. And that's sort of where we pivoted or started thinking about with H402 is unblocking more of these use cases, such as giving access to information, giving access to compute, giving access to storage, so that not just agent swarms, but independent agents also can work together. And we see this sort of also extending to other realms of agents, such as more humanoids or robotics-based agents, when we see a future where they would coordinate with each other. They would not always want to exchange identities, but just local incentives to perform a task together. And we feel that payments would also be the underlying infrastructure layer to enable such local coordinated behaviors. And that's where we think we're going. So while agent to agent is a focus, giving agents access to relevant tools to perform their operations is also a blue ocean that's really not been solved for yet.
Fascinating, fascinating. We only have a couple of minutes left. So one of the investors said very, very nicely. He said that Web3 needs AI, but AI may not need Web3. And things like X402 might be, about to prove them wrong. So Eric, what's your take on that?
I think it comes down to like how much do you want to build on the shoulders of giants? Like I think that so far AI has strictly required the internet, right? And you've needed basically like all these agents are trained off data from the open internet, right? And what Web3 really is it tries to advance what is possible in a decentralized way in the spirit of what happened with like the read write internet. Balaji Srinivasan has like the great quote. Web 1 was read, Web 2 was read and write, and Web 3 is own. And that kind of is I think the thing to leverage. Like if you want your agent to have money independent of you as an entity, the current only way to do it from a technical standpoint is using like Web3 technology. Yeah, Chris Dixon's book quotes the Balaji quote, but this is like I think that there's like a kind of a mismatch in reputation. Like people hear crypto and they think like, oh, all the like behavior that personally I don't like. It's cliche to say, but I'm in it for the tech. Like the technology that exists there is actually extremely good. And I think that sometimes that technology gets undervalued by people because of the rhetoric involved in it. And so And that's been the same with like every new innovation. The early internet was, people criticize it for being full of like not good content, and there's all sorts of outrage. And so the you may build alt systems, but I suspect the systems that you build will be very similar to the systems that already exist. And so it's probably worth evaluating, like, should we just go and use the systems that already exist?
Right. Fascinating. Well put. Well put. We are out of time, but we appreciate Eric and Jaypal for joining this very important conversation. And I hope in the agentic web, we make transactions and payments as a first order primitive, unlike how it was evolved during the World Wide Web. And I should also remind everybody that transaction doesn't just mean transactions in money or data. Transactions can also be about intelligence itself. As I said in my opening comments, you may want to buy 1 kilogram of intelligence from another agent. And what would that mean? So the pricing of intelligence is also going to start playing a role. A lot of the research we have done at MIT is about this knowledge pricing, pricing data, pricing compute, pricing training, pricing inference, and so on. And the other concept also we're very busy working on is thinking about packet switch intelligence. Just the way we are thinking about packet switch networks, I think a lot of the transactions aspect that you talked about, Eric, will start playing a role. There'll be tokenization of everything down to not just micropayments, but microbytes and micro wisdom. So I think this is just a fascinating future that's coming up. Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Jay.